Anyway, another video about enjoying what you have before it becomes a memory. 2 years ago, I had a conference in Taiwan, and on my way home, I wasn't allowed onto the airplane. The problem was that my ticket flew through 2 different cities in China. I didn't realize you need a visa to do that. I kind of got greedy. I wanted to see a lot of sites before I go home. That's why I picked that. So I ended up having to fly through Tokyo, and I stayed at an internet cafe. Kind of a very small room. You can book it by the hour, or you can book at night. And actually, at the beginning of the quarantine, I almost thought about traveling to Japan and just staying long term in one of those. I could stay there a whole lot cheaper than anywhere here in the U.S. Although I did move to, right now I'm in Missoula, Montana, which is about as good. Actually, it's probably cheaper to stay here because food is pretty expensive over in Japan. The reason I wanted to travel out of the country during the quarantine was because I was worried about how close-minded a lot of Americans are about the whole COVID-19 situation. I had a good feeling that Japan would make the recovery first. Anyway, so I ended up staying a night in Tokyo, and now thinking back on it, I had a good time. At the time, it was a big inconvenience. I was so worried. If I would have a job to go back to when I got back from that conference, because I was already kind of maxing out how long I could get away from Seattle, and now I was like a day late getting home. But now looking back at it, I really enjoyed that time, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to. That's just my luck. Every time I want to shoot a video outdoors, there's something noisy going on. But again, I'm going to look back at this and be happy that I had this moment, so. Alright, let's enjoy having that noise in the video, because we're going to look back at it and wish we had that moment again. But that became a big reason why I chose Japan as the country to flee to during the quarantine. At the beginning of the crisis, I was thinking to myself, there's no way the US is going to do better than the other countries, just because of my own experience. See, sometimes in the US, whether it be at the office or on a plane, if I tell somebody that, could you, because I have dietary restrictions, if I tell somebody who's sitting next to me eating, could you try to keep your food neat? I'd really like to avoid contact with this stuff. People get really defensive, right? You go to Japan and you say the same thing. People ask you, oh, I should probably take better care of my health too. You know, what should I do? And people actually engage in conversation and want to learn new things, right? Here in the U.S., nobody wants to learn anything new, right? Same thing with a lot of other countries, right? I would say Japan, Taiwan. The few times I've been to China, I get that same vibe as well. Eastern Europe, right? To a lesser extent, Canada. In the U.S., everybody is closed-minded, right? If you get quarantined, you know, and you ask for healthier foods because you don't want to make yourself even more sick when you're in quarantine, people think you have 3 heads. And so at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, I started to review all the places that I've traveled to and started to think about where I would be comfortable staying long-term. The first thing that came to mind was an internet cafe in Japan. And then I thought about the hostel that I stayed in Warsaw, Poland. That was 4 years ago now. Funny thing is, that whole hostel has been converted into a quarantine center. And that's unfortunate, because I was hoping to get to know the owner of that hostel. He had a daughter who was about 16, 17 years old when I stayed there that time. And I was hoping to get to know her after she grows up. And I've been putting off going back to Warsaw because of computer game conferences. And then I eventually I had a girlfriend here in Seattle, and we went on a few trips here. So I've been putting off going back to Warsaw. And unfortunately, the hostel has closed. I don't know if they'll reopen after all that quarantine facility is done with. Anyway, I had a good time in Japan. Where else have I gone to? I talked about Warsaw. Oh yeah, when I was in Warsaw, see, one of the big problems with arriving in Warsaw is that you get there really early in the morning. Sometimes the hostel bed is not ready. And so I called the hostel before traveling there, and they had language barriers, and I had to use Google Translate, and it became a mess. But eventually they understood what I was trying to tell them. See, at the time it was really frustrating, right? Because I don't want to get to Warsaw and be a mess. You know, it's not very fun to walk around downtown Warsaw with your luggage, especially for me. I pack a lot of heavy things. I was also on my way to the Computer Olympiad, so I had 3 computers. I had game boards because I want to be able to demonstrate what the computer is moving on the actual boards. I didn't want to drag all that through downtown Warsaw. Not fun. In Warsaw, they don't have very big sidewalks, right? They're still recovering from. You can still see remnants of the Cold War when you go to downtown Warsaw. Anyways, so I called the hostel, and huge language barriers, finally get through with them. Now looking back at it, it's a privilege to be able to do all of that, right? It'll be a long time